What's up, you guys? This is Civil, and you're watching Civilopedia. And today we get to talk about one of the most famous kings of the ancient world, Hammurabi, the leader of a small city-state Babylon, who turned it into a Babylonian empire, conquering the entire Mesopotamian plains. Let's get to it. So if in the first episode we spoke about the Sumerian civilization, the first, and their half-mythological, half-real king Gilgamesh, today we're jumping 2,000 years forward into circa 2000 BC, when the city-state of Babylon was actually founded. An average Babylonian house during this time would have been made out of mud bricks, which, if you think about it, are pretty easy to make if you just have mud and water and some ingenuity. And one of the things that we know is that if it was a particularly hot day, they might be sleeping on the roof to catch some of that sweet wind at night. The city center was really packed, and privacy wasn't really a thing. In terms of food, Babylonians were growing a lot of barley, which was native to the area and easy to cultivate, and they made bread, and they made beer. You already know about beer from my Sumerian episode, so we're just continuing the lavish lifestyle. They had onions and lentils, and meat, including fish and lamb, was only reserved for rich people. And honey. Honey itself was also a luxury resource. In terms of fashion, men and women alike wore clothes made out of wool. Men wore skirts while walking bare-chested if it was a particularly hot day, and women wore dresses made from wool, while the upper classes were wearing things like robes made out of wool. They also had jewelry, upper classes I mean. They also had jewelry made out of copper, gold, or lapis azul, which is this blue, beautiful gemstone that you can find in that area. And last but not least, beards were extremely important for men to show their strength and masculinity. Well-groomed, long beards were considered a symbol of strength. In terms of entertainment, the people of the time had a game called the Royal Game of Ur, which is basically a proto-version of today's backgammon. So that's pretty cool. They had scribes and priests gather them in public places where the people would gather around with a beer to listen to a fantastic story, many times religious or with an important moral outcome, not just any kind of novel that you will. No Twilight and no 50 Shades of Grey, I imagine, were being read. And perhaps the most important occasions or events in the year were festivals, most of them dedicated to religious relevance experiences, with the most prominent one being Marduk, the god that is kind of like the head of the pantheon for the Babylonian religion. Marduk is associated with like healing and lightning and storms, and he also carved the sky and the earth by defeating the heavenly monster of Tiamat. So even though the ancient city of Babylon feels like maybe it was there forever, Babylon was actually founded only in 1894 BC. Let's call it the High Bronze Ages. And the city-state was overshadowed by larger and older neighbors who had more control and more influence. Babylon was not a very important city-state. However, by the time of the fifth king of the city of Babylon, Sin-Muballit, Hammurabi's dad, had turned the city-state's fortunes around, conquering neighboring city-states like Borsippa, Kish, and Sippar, and eventually creating a system of alliances with city-states like Yamhad and Mari from the north of Babylon. Now, if you want to talk about enemies, in that time, Babylon was surrounded by two pretty important empires. One of them is Elam, later-day Persia, who was controlling the southern plains. This is the area that's more flat and more near to Babylon, and the Assyrian Empire to the north of Babylon, which was the largest and most organized military in the area. These two major powers posed a threat to any independent city-state, and Hammurabi's dad, Sin-Muballit, by conquering Borsippa, Kish, and Sippar, was trying to create something that he could perhaps snowball. But before he could complete his mission, he had grown ill and abdicated his throne to his son, Hammurabi. Let's talk about our guy. So Hammurabi, the sixth king of Babylon, didn't expect to be the king so early. His dad grew sick, and suddenly the guy is in the position of power. Now, just as he is rising to power, another neighbor is looking at this and saying, that Babylon city-state that just conquered three neighboring city-states lost its king. Maybe the new king is a young guy who doesn't really know what's going on. Maybe now is the time to play a move against him. So the city-state of Elam gets Larsa, a neighboring city-state, and Babylon to feel like they're both going to attack each other. Basically, Elam is trying to get these city-states to get into a fight. But before they actually declare war on each other, they discover the plot. And instead of fighting each other, they decide to enter an alliance to defend themselves from the threat of Elam. Hammurabi takes the opportunity, takes the initiative, and takes the probably war machine that Sin Muballit, his father, left behind, and he strikes at Elam. With Larsa as his allies, he conquers most of Elam's territory and becomes the undisputed ruler of the southern plains of Mesopotamia. In fact, he's so powerful that by the time he's done, he conquers Larsa as well. They didn't really send any military forces or resources when the campaign began, and he has no problem conquering them as well. So suddenly, the growing empire that Sin Muballit left has exploded in land, resources, and men flocking to Hammurabi's cause. This guy has now created a system of alliances and conquered the largest power in southern Mesopotamia. So upon becoming the ruler of the Mesopotamian plains, Hammurabi now receives a message from his ally in Mari saying that because the Marian king sent all of his troops to help Hammurabi, the Marian people are trying to rise up in a revolt against him. Hammurabi says, don't worry, bro, I'm going to be there soon with my army, and I'm going to tell your people to calm the fuck down and respect their king. However, on the way, he realizes that the city-state Enshuna, who is a major threat to his father and himself, resides. And so, as he's already leading his now giant army of all these men who have joined him, he goes through Enshuna, captures the city, and razes it to the ground. Not very civilized, if you ask me.
Hammurabi tandahar. Heprumata rutsin deni tsu senija harat.
He then arrives at Mary, and he meets their king, Zimri-Lim. Ayo, Zimri-Lim, what's up? It's your G, Hammurabi. I have arrived after marching through most of Mesopotamia to your city-state. Oh yeah, that's dope, bro. Nice, thanks. Thanks for coming to save me from my rebellion. Wait, you're gonna save me from my rebellion, right? The god Marduk wants me to unite all of Mesopotamia. So Hammurabi has done some deeds. He's betrayed some allies, he's conquered a lot of territory, and he's had a lot of men flock to his cause. He is the #1 leader in the area in terms of momentum and popularity, and at this time he decides he's going to take on the giant. The largest empire in this region is the Assyrian Empire, and so he enters into a state of war with their leader. However, very soon after, the king of the Assyrians dies of old age, and their empire enters into disarray. This is a massive W for Hammurabi, who takes the opportunity to get their new king, who's just a child, to pay tribute to him. Hammurabi is now the undisputed king of all of Mesopotamia, the southern plains, the northern mountains, all the way to Syria and Lebanon. He's now ready to take the step that will cement his legacy forever, the Code of Laws. So we all knew this moment was coming, Hammurabi and the Code of Laws. Let's talk about why it's important and what's unique here. So as I was preparing for this episode, I was surprised to learn that Hammurabi's Code of Laws is actually not the first. There had been several codes of laws issued by different kings before Hammurabi's time. What's unique about his Code of Laws is A, how extensive it is. It has 282 laws, and they're broken down by categories. Civil law, in the family stuff, divorce, business. There's also rules for kings, cementing the idea that no one is above the rule of law. There appears to be 3 divisions of judgments based on who you are. Are you a free man? Are you a freed slave? Or are you an active slave? And based on those categories, there's also the punishment or the reward based on which side you're on in the case. But as historians understand it today, the biggest difference that Hammurabi's Code of Laws introduced was that it was a corporal punishment, meaning when you did bad stuff, they would chop your arm, your nose, and other limbs or parts of your body. The concept was the eye for an eye, whereas previous Code of Laws issued by previous kings basically just wanted people to compensate the victim monetarily. Hammurabi wanted you to pay with something that you're not going to want to lose, something that's dear to you. And so the idea that the Code of Laws of Hammurabi is something that instills fear and order in people is a really powerful one. Imagine you're a very wealthy man in the old days and you just know that you can get out of any crime by paying somebody. That doesn't really deter you. But if you're going to lose your you-know-what, maybe you're not going to do it. So this is a kind of a breakthrough. And in terms of historical analysis, historians now believe that the Moses 10 Commandments and subsequent laws of the Israelites that came into the Hebrew Bible are heavily influenced, if not plagiarized, by the Hammurabi Code of Laws, because it was so prevalent around Mesopotamia. Now, another unique element about Hammurabi's Code of Laws was that he carved it into a large stone stele. This is a giant stone column. He placed it in the center of Babylon, and while most people didn't know how to read, it was still there in the center of the city. For example, if your friend was a scribe, you could ask him to read this out to you. The concept was very clear. This is in the center of the city. Don't tell me you didn't know the rules. If you commit a crime, you will get punished. Hammurabi wants you to fear that you will lose something dear to you if you mistreat other people. That's why Hammurabi is considered to be the lawgiver. Even during his time, before he died, people considered him to be half a god. The dude conquered all of Mesopotamia, coming from a relatively unimportant city-state, and then he drops the hottest code of laws you can imagine. Extensive in his laws, covering so many categories of life, and being so methodical in its approach to how to appropriate punishments for people's behaviors, this is something that was truly groundbreaking and changed history forever. Good job, Hammurabi. You really seemed to care about your people. So being the legendary leader that he is, Hammurabi has actually appeared in almost every Civ game. Civ 1, Civ 2, Civ 3, Civ 4, and Civ 6. Let's talk about his bonuses in Civ 6. Hammurabi's leader ability is called Ninu Ilu Sirum, which translates today to, "This man is a fool, O God." The phrase doesn't actually have anything to do with Hammurabi's leader ability, but it is a particularly common phrase found in a lot of different texts, and historians believe that maybe it was used to kind of train scribes or as some kind of proverb. However, his leader bonus does have a lot to do with actual history. Babylon, being one of the first empires of the region, connected by the era in the Civ game as the beginning of urbanization. And by urbanization, they mean constructing districts. You build a district, you get the first building in it for free. Hammurabi's leader agenda in Civ 6 is that he likes to build every type of district, and he doesn't like other emperors who only build the same district again and again. Meanwhile, the Babylonian Empire's unique bonus has a really cool translation. Enuma, Anu, Enlil means when, Anu, and Enlil, two major gods of the Mesopotamian pantheon. You can imagine this sentence being the equivalent of the Bible's Genesis when he says, "in the beginning." The phrase is attributed to people of the time writing texts about things happening in their skies, eclipses, moon phases, positions of planets, etc. So when they say Enuma, Anu, Enlil, therefore there was an eclipse, etc. This can be attributed to the Babylonians' ability to receive eurekas, revealing entire technologies. If you play the base game, or if you're a cultured man like me, you just get a free eureka every time you complete a library. As for Babylonians' unique unit, here's an interesting story. So the Sabum Kibitum is actually a unit that didn't exist during Hammurabi's time because they were using iron tools/weapons. Hammurabi, like I said in the beginning of the episode, was during the High Bronze Ages. The Iron Ages isn't starting until about 1,000 years later, which is when in the Neo-Babylonian Empire, under a different dynasty that has little to do with Hammurabi, they started using a shock troop called Sabum Kibitum. And last but not least, Babylonians' unique structure is the Palgum, which in the game replaces a watermill. However, this is way before anybody invented watermills. What it actually was in real life were small-scale canals, and what they would do is that they would feed them into these elaborate gardens. Think the Hanging Gardens of Babylon, except something that actually happened instead of a myth. For example, we know about the Assyrian king Sennacherib. He built a luxurious garden fed by aqueducts and elaborate canals, so that would have been a use case for a palgum. And that's all for this episode. I'm really excited to see you guys for the next one, where we will be covering Ramses II. Catch you soon.